So that was the first howl I had ever personally heard, other than outside videos that I've seen on TV.
Well, it sucks we didn't put audio out. The main reason I didn't is because it's been snowing up here all day. It's been raining. It's been nasty weather. Still should have had audio rolling. Oh, wish we had audio rolling, because it was like a
incredible.
lull. There was a lull there. You get that long howl and almost an immediate response. That was cool.
Hello and welcome to Sailor Sasquatch, where we share Sasquatch evidence as well as encounters. I am very excited about this documentary because the areas that we are going to be covering are the first areas that I was aware of when I became aware of the creature Sasquatch and that it actually exists. So we are going to go to the Highway 12 corridor. And though Highway 12 spans all the way from Michigan to Washington State, we are just going to cover the areas that go from Mossy Rock to Packwood, which is roughly 44.4 miles. So we were given an Airbnb to stay at while we filmed this documentary. We picked this Airbnb mostly because it is an absolutely gorgeous home, and we thought that maybe there would be a small chance that we would pick up some audio while we were there, but we were mostly there just to film and get our work done. Unfortunately, the second night, before we had audio even going, we hear some amazing vocals that were not far from us. Later on that night, we captured some more audio, and we're gonna play those for you later on in the documentary. I'm also gonna link the Airbnb down below, because if you are looking for the creature Sasquatch or you're hoping to hear one, your chances here might be very good based on our experiences. This property is very close to a creek and also the Cowlitz River. We're bringing some of our good friends with us, including local story collector Jack Bowers, who is a channel favorite. We're also bringing with us Scott Taylor, who is a longtime member of the BFRO and has collected more stories than anybody else in Washington State. We're also bringing Olympic Project member Shane Corson with us, who collected all of the audio on this trip.
The first couple of minutes, if you don't mind, is to let people know that you are recording incidents along Highway 12. Highway 12 runs from Detroit all the way to Aberdeen, 2,484 miles. It started in 1923 and was finished in 1926.
As far as Bigfoot reports go, the Highway 12 corridor is just really active. It seems like it's a travel route to go from the high country up above Packwood all the way down to the low country in the wintertime, we think. Can't prove it. But I've got a number of reports here that I've taken, and I'm sure there are many more that where people did not say anything or report anything, or maybe reported it to a different group. Some of our favorite squatching places are in that corridor there. The two fish hatcheries that are on the Cowlitz River south of or west of Mossy Rock, one here and then another page over, that'd be up above here. There's a steelhead hatchery at one, and there's a trout hatchery at another. Those seem to be good places. People can go there, camp out, spend a weekend. They can fish. The kids can run around. There's plenty of room. It's a nice place if you want to go have a road trip for a day and go visit those two fish hatcheries. But we've had a number of reports from along there, starting at the west end. This happened a long time ago. This was May 15th, 1981. And the guy was young at that time. He and his cousin were fishing. The whole family was camping in the area by the boat ramp. And they were fishing. At that place, it's a kind of a long hike down through a wooded trail to get to the area where they were casting their lines. And while they were fishing there, they realized, well, there's something here watching us. We can't see it clearly, but we can sure tell it's there. And it was right behind him. And he didn't say anything to his cousin, but his cousin picked up on it himself. And pretty soon his cousin is trying to get his attention in motion. Let's get out of here. And so they both picked up their poles and started running. They only made it about 50, 60 yards. And the guy in the back, the one who filed the report, he looked over his shoulder, and all he said he could see was a great big arm and hand go reaching for him. It didn't actually grab him, but it sure sped him up on the run out of there. They went and told their grandpa that they thought they'd just been chased by Bigfoot. There was another one at the same boat ramp, maybe a couple hundred yards away from this spot. That was January 2nd, 2010, and he was night fishing right by the boat ramp. We went down there, took a look. Actually, we went down for both of these, took a look, and he was what he called glow balling, night fishing. And, you know, in the dark, it's foggy, it's cold, you know, early January. He said something threw a big rock in the water right next to where he was. And that startled him. And then he heard something like it was walking in the water. And then he heard a very deep growl sound. With that, he was done fishing.
A sheriff had a home by a log cabin up there. And he eventually had to move out because the Bigfoot were bothering him. So he had a couple daughters and were bothering him so bad he couldn't stay there. So he had to leave. And his dad was with him one time when they went up to the pump house to check on the well, what was going on for the watering system. This is because they're off grid back in there. And he says literally there was a couple of Sasquatch in around him and tried to cut him off, wouldn't let him get back to the house. And so they went around and around on that deal. And he literally had to, they had to do some yelling and screaming and everything else to finally get back to the house. They
should have put trail cameras up.
Yeah, well, and get what?
That would repel them.
Yeah,
that's how you want to keep them away. Put trail cameras up.
Let's see, the next one is also on the Cowlitz River. It's the next dam up, the barrier dam. This was May 17th, 2009. This gentleman has turned in 2 reports from the area. He was just fishing there by the fish hatchery below the barrier dam. They were in a drift boat. They were anchored up near the south side shore and just fishing. And they heard something on the north side shore. There's kind of a bluff there, and it was walking along the top of that. And they said it sounded like a monkey screaming. And they could tell as it was making vocalizations, it was walking along. He also mentioned that a similar thing had happened near the Salcombe graveyard. He had mentioned that it had happened a few years before, so that was back in October of 2005, which is really close to the time I had my first sighting. It was right before deer season, and so he was out on their property at the south end of the cemetery, and he was just sitting there in his vehicle as it was getting dark, and he was just, you know, watching for whatever deer might come out. And he saw down the road kind of a grayish brown hairy thing that looked out of place. He couldn't see exactly what it was. And so he was, you know, he had his headlights on his vehicle, and it then stepped across the road in 2 steps and disappeared into the woods, into the dark. Said it was about 7 foot tall, grayish brown, bipedal creature. And that particular report was featured on one of the first year episodes of Finding Bigfoot.
Our friend Ariel grew up in Morton across from this cemetery. She had an encounter when she was a young child where she saw a deer cross the road and she thought there was a bear chasing her, and she watched the deer go through the graveyard as the bear chased it. The deer eventually turned around and went the other way, and what she thought was a bear was following it until the bear stood up on 2 legs and did the typical Patterson-Gimlin stride as it crossed the road in a few steps and went right up the hill. That encounter is in another video of ours, our Tide-in-a-Pan video, and I will link that in the description.
Then there is another report a little further upstream. It's a little bit further away from the Cowlitz River. It's about 3 miles southeast of Mossy Rock. This guy and his roommate, they lived in this house out there in the country, and he heard deep guttural growling right outside his window. It scared him, but he also noted that he was hearing wood knocking from in the woods, and that seemed to be kind of a common thing around there. He also noted that the barn cats were all agitated and upset about something, so something had been there. He was so afraid of what was coming around his place that he covered all the windows with sheets because he didn't want them looking in. Not too far from there, only a couple of miles as the crow flies, I was archery hunting in that area in 2009 with 2 hunting buddies. And we had walked up an old logging road to the top of a ridge line, and we were getting ready to go down the slope to the creek at the bottom, and then we were going to pick up a road on the other side of the creek and follow it out. So we spread apart. We went down. I got across the creek. It was near frozen. It wasn't a very big creek, but I got up on the road on the other side. It's about 50 yards from the creek, and I'm waiting for my friend on my left to come and catch up to me. And so I turned to look that way to see him coming up the road, and kind of off to the right from him, I watched a Bigfoot go from one tree to the next tree. The funny thing is while we were up on the ridge top, getting ready to go down, we're standing there together, trying to make the plan, and I heard them vocalizing down below, and it was the monkey chatter type vocalizations. That takes you up to Mossy Rock. We've got a couple of other sightings or reports from along the south side of Rife Lake. I didn't go review those, but pretty much what both of those are is people had put in at Tadnapalm at the boat ramp, gone down here, and were fishing the little inlets where the creeks come in. And there were, one of them had an eyeball sighting of several of them. It looked like a couple of adults, a couple of little ones that were wading around in the water looking for, I don't know, crayfish or whatever they could find to eat. The other one, they were trolling right near shore, and something was throwing sticks of wood from the woods at them, and they left. So that's just an example of what's going on down there. There's probably a whole lot more that we don't know about that people see. I think it's so common that people just like, yeah, it's a Bigfoot, you know, no big deal. But that whole corridor is really good. It's like, I think they follow the Cowlitz River. You know, there's, you know, the Morton area.
If you live in Washington State and have been into the subject of Sasquatch for any length of time at all, then you have probably heard of the Night Watchman. The Night Watchman report took place near Morton, Washington. And I'm not going to go over that right now because we actually have a video on that with Scott Taylor, who took the report. I'll link that down in the description. But it is a very interesting case where there were 2 people that were hired to watch over some logging equipment. And they had multiple encounters with Sasquatch, including a run-in with a very small one.
We're at the Morton area and recording from different incidences about Bigfoot, Sasquatch from here. Most of the area from here out to I-5 is pretty sterile as far as Bigfoot activity is concerned. There's a little bit, but not near so much as what we have from here on to the pass, White Pass. And I would start with the first area that I'm aware of, and that's Fern Gap, east of Morton here, about 5 miles. And as you start down the hill, there's a place off to the left was the culmination of a ridge line that comes from Kiona Peak. And there was a garage sale up there. It was either last summer, I think the summer before we went in there. And they had one of these silhouettes of Bigfoot standing against the garage, and I got to talking to people, and I'm ready to talk Bigfoot anytime I can. But anyway, the upshot is, she said, yeah, we have them come down here all the time, or used to. And so we had a nice long discussion about what it meant to be often. And she said, oh yeah, about every other week or so they'd show up, and when the apples were on the tree, they would show up for that as well. And they'd catch glimpses of them in the yard in the evening, and again in the morning from time to time. So they were Bigfoot aficionados, you might say. Happy to have them around. And later, as events transpired, her husband passed away, and she didn't want to leave the area. And at the same time, another family moved in above them, and that put the kibosh on the animals coming through all the time. And although from time to time there'd be noises, there'd be indicators that they were still in the area, but they weren't quite so bold as they had been before. And while we were having this discussion, and this is a lot of fun, while we were having that discussion, an elderly lady from a little bit west of their place says, well, I know about Sasquatch, I know about Bigfoot. She says, my grandfolks had a place just about a quarter of a mile away. She says, when I was a little girl, I would go over to Grandpa and Grandma's place and spend weekends and whatever else. And she says, one time I had to go to the bathroom, and at that time, this is years ago, all they had was an outhouse, the family privy, you might say. So she went down, and she just left the door open because the whole thing, the exposure was into the woods, down a field and into the woods. There's no privacy issue. So she was sitting there contemplating, let's put it that way, and a Bigfoot walked right in front of her in the middle of the field and stood, turned, and looked at her. And at her age and with no extra information available at that time, she wasn't sure what she was looking at, but she says it was definitely curious. It stopped dead in its tracks, was looking at her, and she was not in a position to get up and go anywhere. And soon, it just continued on its way down toward the, well, now it would be Rife Lake. At that time, it wasn't Rife Lake. But anyway, it left and was out of sight. So she went back to the house and told her grandpa what she thought she had seen. She says, it's just a big, old, hairy guy. And so Grandpa asked a few questions about it and everything. And he says, no, I don't know what they called it at that time because that's years ago. But he explained it to her. No, they live around here. They're here all the time. We see them from time to time. And it's a big, long swale from the back side of this other person's place I was talking about. And it's just a natural runway right straight through. And Grandpa said, that this is not uncommon. They see it all the time. And I think he tried to explain what it was to her and everything. But as years went by, she got correct information and said, yeah, it was a Bigfoot. It had to be. There was nothing else it could have been. If you're right there on the highway and you look due south, you cross down across Rainy Creek, around Dog Mountain, and there's Tainapam Park. And Tainapam Park, as you're well aware from your other videos, is a pretty hot area. The gentleman that put the flooring in our house and that's been about 6 years ago. We were talking Bigfoot, and he says, I can show you Bigfoot tracks anytime you want. And I said, okay, I'm willing, I'm ready. He says, over by Tainapam. And that's obviously before you guys had this other film. And he says, no, the tracks are there all the time because they cross through there and go down to the river and back up again. And so Arla and I said, oh, okay. I kind of took that with a grain of salt because sometimes what you're hearing is not necessarily rings true. So Arla and we drove down, I think the next weekend, and we went up and down the road a little bit looking for tracks, but anybody who's been there knows that it's a lot of gravel and hard, a lot of traffic in that area, and we saw no tracks. And it's not that they weren't there, but we saw no tracks. So I kind of held that story in abatement for a while. But anyway, so when you folks, Sailor Sasquatch, had that film with that dump truck driver chasing one down the road. Anyway, that was kind of a validation, you might say, that what he was trying to tell me was real. I used to do a lot of hunting in that area, and so then I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said, well, wait a minute. Matter of fact, I just got off the phone with him here a few minutes ago. He said, wait a minute. He says, Tumwater Mountain is the mountain right behind Tainapam, due south, and it's tall. And it runs all the way through to Ryan Lake and Mount St. Helens and all that country down there. And he took his a bedroll, sort of a thing, and a little bit of food and his rifle, and he made up his mind he was going to climb Tumwater Mountain and get to the top of that on his own, hunting, solo. And so he took off and did that. And it says it took him almost all day to get to the top. And he finally found a place that he figured was suitable to spend the night. And he got a situation there, and he was sleeping. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, he heard the most god-awful yell and scream. He says it wasn't a bear, an elk, a deer. It was nothing. He says it had to be a Bigfoot. There was nothing he could line the sound that thing was making. The volume of it and the length of the sound are giveaways as well. And so he crawled out of his bedroll because he had no tent. He was just kind of out in the open, and he didn't want to be caught, in a sleeping bag. He wanted to be up where he could see what's going on, or at least have some defense. And the animal made a few more gestures that way, and he stayed up until daylight, and then decided he better not hunt in there. But he knew what it was. He had that confidence that he had a situation where Bigfoot was warning him to not be in that area. And I think that's a lot of what they do anyway. If they were violent, there'd be a lot of body parts, let's put it that way, laying around. Also, at the bottom of that mountain on this side where you start up, the road forks, and it goes back in there, I'd hazard maybe 2-3 miles, and then it breaks up again one more time, and there's 3 homesteads in there. And nobody gets in there except the people that own the homestead. And my buddy, another friend of mine, his aunt and uncle had the farthest homestead back in there. And he says, I know that they were talking about Bigfoot a number of times back in there, but he couldn't get them to admit it straight away because they were afraid that, and they were older people, they were afraid that if they let that out, people would be bothering them on the one hand and asking them to leave the area because of their age and their defenses may not be up as where they thought they should be. So I don't necessarily buy that, but they've since moved out. But he is very, very confident that again that because of the location, nobody's in there. The other 3 homesteads were in there, and they were not really spread out a lot. They were just kind of isolated pockets. And the gentleman is a very astute and very dedicated hunter. He's also got a place up here at Summit Lake, and here just a few weeks ago, a Bigfoot crossed the road right in front of his place.
Yeah, so we were camping up in the hills off of Highway 12, and We were on this camp out all together, and a buddy of mine, David Hallett, and I were hiking down this trail to kind of a known location, and we went about halfway to where we were intending to go, and kind of hunkered down, and we're sitting there in the quiet, kind of therming around, and started hearing some really like sing-songy vocals, sounding kind of female-like, and that went on for a little bit and stopped. So I got the gumption to come back there the next night to bring Jonathan and a few others out there and to camp out a little bit further down the trail. And so we did. We ended up all hiking out to this location and set up our camp. You guys set up a tent. We were cowboy camping, a few of us. And Jonathan and I were catching up. We had a fire going, and we were kind of catching up. It was like 11-ish or something. 11 p.m. and as Jonathan and I are just sitting there talking, from off behind us, the most crystal clear whoop I've ever heard. Your classic whoop.
Freaking. And as soon as that happened, we just like looked at each other. But at that moment, how far do you think it was away?
Wasn't far.
Not more than 100 feet.
Oh yeah, it was close. Nighttime, so we both just kind of looked at each other like, did that really just happen? You know? And I knew instantly then we were gonna have probably a pretty active night, which it ended up being very active.
And then it was 20 minutes later that tree comes down. And it was end of summer. It wasn't like it wasn't windy at all. And then just the tree comes down, and that's when some other stuff had happened with people that were hiking the road just half-mile away.
Yeah.
They had recorded some vocalizations.
Some more of that sing-songy stuff. Yeah, it was a really nice warm night. That's why we were cowboy camping, and just quite an experience having that tree come down right behind camp. But that whoop, I mean, that was amazing. I've heard whoops before, but not like that.
My name is Melissa Martinson. I'm a member of the Washington chapter of the BFRO, and I'm going to go over a report. It's report number 1772. It was a Class A sighting in the year 2000. It was fall, October 11th, Lewis County. Nearest town was Morton, right on Highway 508. So I'm just going to read what the gal reported. When I was coming home from Chehalis, I was right between Brown's Mechanic and the old chicken barns, and I saw what looked like a bear hunched in the ditch. I stopped the car, and it stood up, and I thought it was a gorilla. It looked right at me, turned its head toward me, and it looked like it was hurt on its right side. I remember I saw blood and noticed the arm was slouched to one side. It looked right at me as it walked across the street. It had a sad expression, could tell it was hurt. I said to myself, "You're bigger than me. You go right ahead." And then I drove home. It happened so fast. I didn't tell anyone the story until my son came home, telling about his teacher talking about Sasquatch, and encouraged me to talk to him. I wonder how many people don't tell others about what they saw. The skin was black and leathery around the nose, and eyes and ears were pointed and protruded through the hair on the side of the head. It looked really athletic and muscular from the waist down, and its upper body was really big and strong looking. Its hands and feet were big also. Strange things have been going on in our neighborhood from time to time. When I called the sheriff, they said this stuff has been going on over from Randall to Morton.
1963, the Mayfield Dam went in. 1963. In 1968, they filled the reservoir from the Mossy Rock Dam for rifling. And in 1994, they started on Skanawha Lake from Cowlitz Falls, that dam, 3 dams in a row. And that has a very little, you would think that wouldn't have any bearing on Sasquatch, except that the bear and the deer feed on the salmon. They cut that off. So there's no food source, or it's a very marginal food source. This rivers up here used to run knee deep in salmon almost all year long, in one form or another. And there was a lot more bear and obviously a lot more Bigfoot and other critters that would feed on the salmon and whatnot. And once they put that first dam in, they basically cut off a lot of that source. And I don't know which direction that Bigfoot would go, but I do know without a full tummy, you got to spread out a little bit and find something different. I think that they're pretty resourceful so far as that's concerned, but we've limited a lot of that resource for the animals. So I thought that was germane to what's going on around here too. The valley is rich with history, and you can't have the history of the area exclusively for a bear or a deer or a Sasquatch. They're all tied together, and which I think is not only interesting but adds a whole different dimension to what we're doing out here, looking for the Sasquatch, understanding the bear population and whatnot. And so I've been there. There are, the state recognizes that there are 300,000 deer in the state. I don't know where they got the idea, but that's their figure. They also say that there's 45,000 to 50,000 elk, 25,000 to 30,000 deer. Not deer, but bear rather. And then for some reason they included Bigfoot. Now that's when the state plugs in a Bigfoot, and considering we have such a hard time with the agencies accepting the fact that they're here, that kind of amazes me. And they say that they're between 2,000 and 7,000 in the state. I've hunted bear almost my whole life. You don't see that many bear if you're out there. And so it makes sense that it's pretty rare when you see a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot, pretty rare. And the fact that they're not interested they're not looking for a party. They want to be completely isolated and by themselves. If you were going to cross country, then that doesn't open up again until it gets all the way up to Elby and Ashford. I knew of a gal up there that had habituating. She and I went to school together and everything. As a matter of fact, she was quite a Bigfoot aficionado herself, over and above that, and had sold books and had a lot of communication with people regarding Bigfoot in the area.
Okay, so a friend told me that a few of her brothers, again I don't know the full details, witnessed while going over Highway 7 between Morton and Elby. They saw what they described as like a large Sasquatch carrying a deer under its arm like a sack of potatoes and moving into the tree line. But they were driving, I don't have any details about that. And then another story she shared was it was a sister and the sister's boyfriend were out for a walk, like down the dirt road near where the parents live, and they heard what they described as like the loudest possible amplitude voice, something screaming from like a ridgeline, and that's it. And they heard a response, and it sounds an awful lot like, you know, a Bigfoot howl.
So it was in December of 2022 where it was a little ways off of Highway 12. It was on the State Route 7. We had a Airbnb that we were staying at over in Elby, and we were outside and we made a fire. It was really cold. I think it was like 19
degrees.
Yeah, it was 19, 20 degrees. And we're sitting by the fire and we hear...
No, first the dogs next to us started barking in a weird bark. So we started paying attention because we're familiar with that. It was like a scared bark. And Then the dogs over here started going off across the road. And then we heard the sound.
Yeah, the only way I would explain it is a deaf person that was outside yelling. And it was just very brief, and that was it.
We waited, though, to see if somebody like, Matthew, come inside the house, you know, something like if somebody called somebody in, but nobody did anything. It was just that weird sound. And then about 5 minutes later, the dogs up on the hill just were going nuts, and they went off for what, half hour?
About a half hour.
Randall is basically the gateway to everything south. You go Forest Road 25 takes you up to the Ryan Lake side of it. It used to go all the way into Mount St. Helens. The 23 it goes below Tongue Mountain all the way down to the Cispa Center and on, and ends up at the lakes Olale and Taklak, Wallop Lake, all that country down there. That's tourist area for sure. A lot of people like that, hunting and tourists. And eventually you go all the way down to Trout Lake and Columbia River. You go all the way down through. And there's a lot of sightings along that corridor. But I know that as you pass the Tongue Mountain area of that part of the Cispas and whatnot, and you're going south, then there's a lot of them in there. If people have heard of Dark Meadows, that's a pretty well-known area. Dark Meadows has a lot of sightings in that area. Very much remote, very much wilderness, hard to get into and out of. There are trails in there. There are motorcycle trails of all things in around the area. I don't know if it's right through the heart of that, but then it goes on from there, McCoy Creek, and on and on and on. And every one of those has Bigfoot sightings. Obviously, I don't know all of them, but I know over the years, any number of people have remarked about Bigfoot being in the area, or they're being run out of the area, people being run out of the area. On the north side, of course, that's Randall, the town, in there, a little burg, and it's been there forever.
So in 2022, one of my friends was on a hunting trip here in Randall, and he was camped at Iron Springs Campground. This guy didn't believe in Bigfoot. He didn't have an opinion, but he's heard my stories. And they're at camp, and he hears 2 knocks. And they're all wondering, like, man, what is that? And then almost instantly afterwards, a tree comes down right near the camp. And him and another guy was like, was that a Bigfoot? But the other guy was like, no, I'm pretty sure that tree just came down naturally. But yeah, they come down. And then my friend was like, yeah, but there's no way that something with hands wasn't making that knock.
And then we would go from there, we would go into the Packwood area, and again, it's the same thing.
So I had myself here, so we heard what sounded like popping or snapping branches. We shrugged it off until it happened again. It was closer and startled me into shouting involuntarily. We drew pepper spray, packed up, and fled hastily and loudly. Nope, nope, nope. So then the next page here, I have, what the heck was that? So I went through and I was like, pros and cons of, if it was a bear, here's what I would have expected. Because this is part of nature journaling practice, is to go through and find a provisional hypothesis for what it is you're experiencing. And so I'm like, okay, well, if it was a bear, I would expect these things to occur. You know, bears are big enough to break branches. Bears would slap the ground with their forepaws, but I would have expected to hear huffing or jaw popping. Yeah. Black bears almost never try to intimidate people, and if they do, they make really obvious bluff charges. You probably would see a bear. I didn't think it was a deer, but I said, okay, well, if it was a deer, here's what I'd expect. Was it a wild cat? Was it a creepy person? And then my final one that I didn't want to even put down was it a Squatch, you know? And I was like, well, pros, we're in Packwood. It's very likely behavior for everything I've, read about, but also it's a cryptid and that's crazy. And so that's kind of what's got me started down the rabbit hole of this stuff.
Oh, it's a rabbit hole.
Yeah, so that is what got me started. Was just a really creepy encounter while picking huckleberries. So I'm going to share the story of my possible Sasquatch encounter at a lake in or near Packwood, in the Packwood surrounds, not far from Packwood Lake, I'll say that. Not at Packwood Lake, but near Packwood Lake. It was 2022, right before the Goat Rocks fire broke out, and a coworker and I decided to go huckleberry picking because I had found this lake, and I had been going fishing there, going after the cutthroat trout, but I noticed there were tons of huckleberry bushes all around, and so I said, well, let's go up there in the August and we'll go pick a bunch of huckleberries. So we go up, I pick her up at the gas station, we get in my little beater Subaru, and we take the rutted road up there. I'll mention, because everyone loves this, that it's a road that you will give your vehicle Packwood pinstripes, which means that you're gonna get all scratched up because this road is pretty much abandoned and the only people who really use it are dirt bikers. So we go up the 3 or 4 miles up to this little lake, and we hop out and we have our picking gear, and we find a nice patch of berries, and we're picking, and we're chit-chatting. But after about 2 hours, you know, the chit-chatter kind of mellows out, and there's, you know, not a lot of conversation. We're just kind of quiet, and we're in what people who study bird language would describe as baseline. So, you know, the birds are making some noise, but there's not a lot of activity. If they were disturbed by us, they've settled down. We're just kind of two animals in the bush, picking berries, doing our thing. And we are very like calm and sort of complacent. If I was being alert, I'm not now. I feel super calm and confident about where I'm at. But then we hear a few sounds that get our attention. The first one, and if you are from the Pacific Northwest, you'll be familiar with this, when you get the really deep layers of duff, the old dead layers of tree needles, it can kind of be sort of hollow and resonant if you step on it, if you stomp on it, or if you were to hit it with a stick. And we heard this like thunk, thunk, thunk sound, as if something was like hitting the ground with your heel really hard. And that kind of got our attention. We were like, that was a little weird. We look at each other like, that's odd. But we go back to picking, and then we hear some branches breaking, and then we hear that thunk, thunk, thunk sound again. And on top of that, we hear a Douglas's squirrel start screaming. They have that like call like that, which made me think, okay, well, that's something that has concerned this animal enough that it's concerning to me. And I get a little like nervous just describing it. So we hear that, and that frightens me enough that I kind of involuntarily shout out, "Hey!" like that, because I've mentioned before, like I grew up in Seattle, and my mother taught me, like, if there is something threatening, you want to be on the offensive. You want to be scarier than whatever that scary thing is. So that's what I did, but I had this feeling of like doom, like terror, like my knees felt weak, I felt really frightened, and my concern was for my coworker. I just wanted to get her to safety. So she gets out her bear spray, and I'm like shoving her ahead of me, like, you get to the car, I will carry on the back, even though I was really scared because that meant I was closest to whatever it was that was being scary. But we get to the Subaru, we get in there, I crank on the engine, and I take off. I've never driven so dangerously down a rutted road. And that really bothered me. And that's kind of where I went through that series of elimination to try to figure out what on earth that could have been. But it bothered me enough that I went back a few weeks later. I'd have to go over my notes to find out exactly when. Because A, I wanted to catch some cutthroat trout, and it was a really good spot for that. And B, I was like, well, this was frightening, but I don't want to be like controlled by this fear. That's silly. Like I'm someone who's gone backpacking by myself in Glacier National Park. You know, I made my parents sick all of my youth, like having to go out into the woods by myself, and I've encountered grizzlies and black bears and scary, sketchy people. And so I figured, like, okay, let's just get my head around this. It's gonna be okay. So I went back to the exact spot that we were huckleberry picking. And in this spot, there's like a big dead tree that's sort of like jutting out into the pond. And so I figured, okay, well, if anything freaky happens, at worst comes to worst, I can get onto this log, I can jump into the lake, and I can swim back over to my car because there's a straight shot. And I'm, you know, throwing my little spinners, and I'm freaked out. I just have like a gross feeling, and I'm like looking over my shoulder, and I'm like, come on, it's fine, it's whatever, you're just fishing, it's a normal day. And then I hear that thump, thump, thump sound again, and I'm like, oh God, no. And so I'm so frightened that I get up onto this tree trunk that's sticking out into the pond, and I like get out on it as far as I think I can, and I'm pretty sure that I made some noise. I was like, hey, you know, like, I'm gonna intimidate you. If you're a deer, this should frighten you. If you're a cat, if you're a bear, this should be enough to freak you out. And it was about that moment that a tree limb, tree branch came flying in my direction, didn't hit me, landed short of me by, 20 feet or so. But the way that I can describe the force with which it was thrown was that one time I went with a friend to the Woodland Park Zoo in Seattle, and we were hanging out by the Asian elephant exhibit, and the elephant must not have wanted us there because she picked up a branch and hurled it at us, and it broke into a few pieces and like rained down on us, and it was terrifying because elephants are very strong and they can throw like a big 10-foot stick. And that is close to the force of what was thrown at me. And so at this point, my heart's racing, my breath is shallow, my knees feel like they're gonna give out, I feel like I'm gonna throw up, and I'm so frightened because I realize like, oh my God, what have I done? Like, I'm here, I'm by myself, this is so stupid, and the car is right over there, but like I will still have to go into the tree line, get back on this sketchy little trail that's barely a trail to get back over there. And so I'm petrified, I don't know what to do, and oh man. And this was around the time right before that Goat Rocks fire started, and it was starting to get smoky, and I was like, this is just weird, I need to get out of here. So, I finally like get up the courage, I'm like having to psych myself up, and I get back on that little trail, and I get to the car, and I'm going around in circles the whole time, like trying to make sure I have like every base covered, get back into the car and speed off, and I've never been back there since. I've thought about it. Part of what has kept me from going back is that road is so sketchy, and I don't have that old beater car anymore, and I don't want to scratch up a different vehicle. It's not a long walk from the main road, and there have been times that I've tried to walk, a quarter of a mile up there just to see how I feel, and I am so overwhelmed with fear that I can't go back up there by myself, which is like kind of shameful for me because I think of myself as like, I'm not afraid of anything. I run into a strange man in the woods and I'm like, yo, what's up? But this was a totally different level of being petrified. And I know you'd said you wanted me to mention the story that my mother told. This is one of my favorite stories. So when she was young, she must have been she was like high school aged. And she was with her mother and younger siblings, and they were driving from Vancouver, Washington to Disneyland. And they would just make a long haul overnight drive. And somewhere in the coastal forests of California, they stopped because my mom and her mom had to stop and make a pit stop. And so they're like, let's just pull off on the side of the road in these deep, dark, scary woods where there's no civilization anywhere to be found. And let's just go here next to the car. So they kind of go like 10 feet off into the woods, and they're both peeing. And she said they both just, like, this feeling came over her, and she looks and makes eye contact with her mother, and she can see her mother is also concerned. And then she said that they could hear the footsteps and the sounds of something that sounded huge approaching them. And at the very same moment, like, they both jump up, they don't even like button their pants, they are back in the car so quickly. And she told me and my brothers this story all our childhoods, and we were like, okay, Mom, sure, you heard a deer. But I remember after I had my experience, I called her and I described it, and she was like, yes, that's it, that's the feeling. And it made me really think about it differently because I'd heard that story all my life and totally just been like, psh, and that was part of her response, was like, now don't you feel crazy because you try to tell people and they're like, it was just a bear, and you're like, no, it wasn't. So I went from being really skeptical and poo-pooing it because I kind of pride myself on like being a very empirical sort of naturalist, and I study nature in this particular way, but this really pushed the boundaries and not only put a little bit of wonder into my nature study, but also a little bit of perspective of like, I'm not at the top of the food chain and I can be put in my place sometimes. Like, yeah, it's something different. Like, my voice is shaking, and I've had some scary experiences in my life, but this was a totally different experience. I can't say I want to experience it just like that again, but maybe if I had other people with me, it'd be okay.
So we're here at Forest Road 46 outside of Packwood, and for whatever reason, there's multiple reports of people driving by at night and seeing a Sasquatch standing by the stop sign here.
That's an old one. They could tell stories.
There's another report I took from further up, closer to Packwood. People lived in a farmhouse. They were all in their living room watching TV. Living room was facing north. The window on their left was facing west, and the whole family saw a Bigfoot come walking out of the woods across the road, walked down their driveway, through their lawn, so they could see it as it passed behind where they were watching the TV, and they all turned to go look out the left window, and it was gone. But pretty upsetting for them, but a pretty good sighting if you ask me.
On our first night in Packwood, we decided to go to the local pub. The reason we went to the local pub is because that's where you hear a lot of the local stories. So we got to talking with a lot of the locals, and there are so many stories there. Nobody wanted to be on camera. However, we did catch some good stories. I was even told to go speak with one of the biggest loggers in the area, and he would not talk Bigfoot to me. He even said to me just to move along because he would not talk Bigfoot. He said that he had seen some things. I get it, it is his livelihood on the line. All I can say is Packwood is very rich with stories, and it almost seems like half of the people there are aware of Sasquatch.
I lived in Packwood for 21 years, and this side of Packwood, 3 miles in an off-grid location, nobody around us on Forest Road 20. There wasn't a soul around us for that length of time, and we had any number of incidents where one time I'd go through an area and not have a problem with it. The next time I go through the area, I was stopped dead in my tracks. Don't come here today. And I honored that because I kind of like my life. But I honored that and wouldn't go in there. And then the next day or a week later, there's no problem whatever. And so I've often found myself thinking in terms of Sasquatch, where I never had a problem with a bear, never had a problem with a cougar. They didn't stop me. I could get in and around them, and they would just let me do whatever I needed to do. No problem as far as that's concerned. So I kind of dismiss all of it except that it has to be a Bigfoot, and there were no other people there. There's the old trail runs from just below Johnson Creek on Highway 12, and it would take you all the way 6-7 miles up to the top of South Point. There's a lookout. Matter of fact, there's about 6 or 8 lookouts from here all the way up there, and I know most of them. We've had lunches and sandwiches on them after we've climbed up there, so I'm real familiar with that. But we've been up on South Point a couple of times and turn around, and a group of us just turn around and go home. My wife and I, the last time we were up there, there's the upper, you can get onto it, the upper trail is in there. You guys went by it, whether you knew it or not, here a while back when you were filming some stuff up there. But anyway, the upper trail, we were about halfway up there, and Arla and I looked at each other and we said, you know, there's something haywire here. And we tried to go a little further, but we just couldn't. We just said, you know, there's a reason for us not to be here. And we thought about it for a couple of minutes and then turned around and decided to go home, back down there. But the next time you go in there, you don't have that problem. And it's very interesting, very much remote. But I don't think people realize what it takes to be remote. Remote, you can be 100 feet off the road, and if you don't know where you're at, it's remote. I've soloed by myself all over this country over the years because I'm a longboat hunter, archer, and it's no good to have a lot of people around you. You need to be by yourself. It's a very individualized sport. And so I would go by myself, uphill, downhill, cross country, and the upshot of the whole thing is there are places that I would be stopped in my tracks and turn around. Courtright Creek. When you start up the pass to the left, there's a road system in there, and I'm talking White Pass, not Cayuse. And to the left there, you follow in on Courtright Creek, and there's a big not a parking area, but a kind of a meadow that some of the hunters use. But the road itself drops into a creek bed, and it's all washed out. And if you're going to hunt that area, you have to find a way across the creek, and carry on from there. And my buddy and his brother would go, they're bow hunters and elk hunters, they would go in there quite a ways and put a pack down in the brush where they knew where it was at, so that they could come back to it in the evening, have a bite to eat before they came out to the truck and the car, because they were in there a long way. And my buddy, he was in there, and he hadn't quite got back there, and the animal was, he never saw it. They only saw the one, but he never saw this particular one, because it dropped off in a ravine and started up the back side of the ravine, up over the top, and was gone. He went over there and looked at it, and he says, there's no way an animal, not a deer, an elk, maybe a bear or something could ferret its way up through the brush, not the brush so much, but the scale and everything, because it was just right up. And he says it was at the top and over the top before he could even get to where he could see it. That's how fast that was. So that kind of shook him up a little bit, and he came back to where his brother was, and his brother said, I had the strangest thing happen. He says, I was walking up on our pack, and he said, I don't know how far away he was from it, but he says it was almost dark. He says, I'm looking at where my pack should have been, and here's it was drug out by the road, and the animal's looking into it, trying to figure out what it wanted, and it was going through the motions. And he says it just took him aback, I guess you'd say, taking a look, see at what was in the pack. And when he finally dawned on both him and the animal, I'll use that term, they parted ways real quick like, and took off. And he told his brother, he says, I can't believe it. He says, it was just standing right. He says, there's nobody else up here. And he says, and how would he know where I did it? So those are two connectors right there. And there was that one in, and they're both convinced. Matter of fact, the one guy got a hold of me last night, and he says, I know of a lake piece in there that he says they literally ran us out of there, us and another group. And I'll get into that on some other time, but I thought that was kind of interesting. And finally, I'll end with this one, if you will. This other gentleman is my brother-in-law. And do you know, are you aware of where the Palisades are? Okay, that's just past the Courtright Creek, and there's a turnout, and it has trees alongside the road, so you can't actually see the overlook. There's a kind of a tourist overlook to the right, and the Palisades are it's down a canyon with columnar rock, basalt rock, and it's very interesting, intriguing, you might say, and that type of thing. So they put it at a viewing site and an overlook right there. He was going back to Yakima, and in the night, and he says somewhere between 10:30 and 12 at night, and he had to go to the bathroom real bad. So he whipped in there, pulled in there, and there's no place to go, so he just on the concrete right there. So he's concentrating on that, and he looks up, and here's a Bigfoot standing right there by him, looking at him. And I says, tell me about it. He says, it was well over 7 foot. He says it was as broad as it was tall, it appeared to him. I said, what about the eyes? He said, well, they're just amber, but they were intense, really intense looking at him. And he says it wasn't all that far away from maybe 30, 40 feet. And he didn't know what he should be doing at the moment, because he had one hand on the plumbing and the other on the car. He wanted out of there, didn't know what to do. That again is very funny. But he looked up again, and the animal just turned around and took a few steps, and there's kind of a dog-leg trail off the corner. He said just stepped off, then it was gone. And he said it scared him so bad. He says, first of all, I couldn't move to begin with. He says, secondly, after I finally got over the shakes and got in the car to leave, he says, I vowed I will never go back to that spot again. It scared him spitless. And he's not a man to be scared about that type of stuff at all. But that was his his go around. On the car road takes off just before the Core Bridge. The car is C-A-R-R, the Core Bridge is C-O-R-P. And when you go down that direction, that only goes 3 miles. At the end of that is a friend of mine, lived there for a while. He's since passed away again. All my friends are passing away. And he had one cross the road on the way up there. Oh, that reminds me of another one. He crossed the road, and he'd come home from a band. He plays in a band, and the road undulates like this. And when he come up over the top of the hill, and the lights on the car coming back down pointed right down into the dip in the road, and there's a Bigfoot sprawled on the road a little bit, trying to get below the lights. Understand what I'm saying? The light was going to shine on him. He saw it coming, so the Bigfoot dropped down on the road. And when the vehicle come over the top and pointed right at him, it got up and left quick. So they're pretty savvy about some of that type of thing. Another gentleman coming down the pass, and he saw one just in the last vestiges of light. He could see something laying in the road in front of him, coming down this side. And when he got closer, he thought it was somebody had hit an elk. And the closer he got, and he was in a big hurry. His mom had health issues. He was trying to get to Seattle or someplace. But anyway, when he finally got up on it, it stood up, and it was a Sasquatch, and left the road real quick, like just jumped up. And I got to thinking about that. That animal would not have laid in the road like that under normal circumstances. I kind of wonder if maybe somebody had hit it and didn't report it. There's a very real possibility. I wouldn't swear to it. I just won't. But he went from a dyed-in-the-wool certified unbeliever to a believer in whatever time it took. And Arla and I used to hike in the area that paralleled the highway in that area, in that location, up the 45 line. You're on. You know where that one's at? You have it on one of your tapes. But anyway, on the 45, and it goes all the way out, comes around the backside to where you can hike up to Packwood Lake. You can get to Packwood Lake 2 or 3 different ways. But anyway, this is the backside of that, and all that. And it's remote. It's all remote. You can't, the animal like that can hide right in plain sight, and just by virtue of how it's all laid out up there.
I messed up.
So just now, we were all, Shane, Jonathan, and I were outside talking, and we're all embarrassed to say that we did not have audio going. We should have.
Nope.
But we just hadn't turned it on yet. We had it ready, hadn't turned it on yet, and we heard a howl from over here in this direction, and so we all were quiet. We went quiet, and then Shane, do you think that was a second responder?
Yeah, there was something set it off. If something howled, but it sounded almost sing-songy, like long duration.
Yeah.
And then there was a response. Well, it sucks we didn't put audio out. The main reason I didn't is because it's been snowing up here all day. It's been raining. It's been nasty weather. Still should have had audio rolling. Oh, wish we had audio rolling, because it was like a lull. There was a lull there. You get that long howl and almost an immediate response. That was cool.
Okay, so after John, Shane, and I heard the Sasquatch, I came and I banged on this window right here, and that is where Missy, Sonia, and Alan were, and I told them to get outside right away. They got up, and you guys flew.
Oh, yeah.
You guys flew out the door.
Tell as soon as you did that.
Yeah, I heard it. So what did you guys hear?
So we came out. You guys were describing what you heard. We walked to the end of the pathway.
We heard a continued howl.
There was another, and I looked, and I said, was that it? Was that what you heard? So something, it was faint and far off, but it did have a howl.
I said, Alan, what did it sound like? And he said, Bigfooty.
Yeah.
And Alan is a skeptic.
I'm a believer, but I'm skeptical of things I hear, and that could have been, it sounded to me like a typical Bigfoot howl. Mm-hmm. So that was the first howl I had ever personally heard, other than outside videos that I've seen on TV.
Having said that,
We have audio going now.
yeah, we have audio running now.
Thank you.